All right, so once again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for this virtual brown bag. My name is Alexandra Villamizar. I am the senior curriculum designer and master teacher at LCMC. And today we are presenting you Inclusiveness for What? Creating a safe space for invisible voices to speak in adult English language classrooms. Before we start with the presentation and before I present our speaker, I would like to share with you the reason behind offering this virtual brown bag. At LCMC, we developed our own curriculum. After COVID hit, we created our own curriculum. And when we started planning the curriculum, we thought a lot about making a curriculum that it was inclusive. And when we talked about being inclusive, we talked about presenting like different nationalities and different like names that represented people from different countries, and also different accents. So when we recorded our audios, we made sure we included like different accents as well. But after we developed the curriculum, and while we were developing the curriculum, we thought about that we were not being inclusive with the LGBTQ community. And the reason behind that, maybe it was because, or in a big percentage, it was because we, the ones creating the curriculum, did not know or don't know about it. No, we don't know how to put that into the curriculum. So we were afraid. Maybe we are still afraid on how to really use the curriculum to include the LGBTQ community. And this is why we are here, because we need to learn. I know that I am not alone in this with this situation, like feeling like this. So this is why we invited Ethan to teach us and to help us how we can provide safe classrooms for our LGBTQ plus community. So Ethan, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to read the bio. So Ethan is originally from Mekong Delta, Vietnam. Ethan is teaching and pursuing their doctorate at the Middle and Secondary Education Department at Georgia State University with a minor in Women's Studies. Ethan's work focuses on the intersection of gender, race, and language education that embraces queerness as a healing teaching and research practice. Ethan has published a wide range of journals, including the International Journal of Qualitative Studies and Education, Journal of Homosexuality, Genealogy, Multicultural Perspective, qualitative report, as well as book chapters in different edited volumes. Ethan was a 2021-2022 co-chair of Social Responsibility Intersection and chair of LGBT PLN at TESOL International. Ethan will serve on the conference's professional council at TESOL in 2022-2024. And in their free time, Ethan enjoys creating, writing, playing with their puppy, and having Vietnamese iced coffee in their free time. So Ethan, thank you so much for accepting to be with us, and like I said before, to guide us through this process so we can offer our LGBT community students a safe environment. So all yours. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. Welcome, everyone. This is the talk. Not is the talk, but I want to switch the word a little bit. So I'm not coming here to teach everyone, but I would love to co-learn with everyone in this space. Please, so this is an interactive conversation. Hopefully, I hope that everyone will join me today in this conversation. So the title for the talk today is Inclusiveness for What? Creating a safe space for invisible voices to speak in adult English language classroom. My name is Ethan Trinh. Again, I use they, them as my gender pronouns. So thank you. Next. Um, so I'm thinking about like thinking a gender, you know. So first of all, because I want to invite everyone to come to this space today. So the first um, item in the agenda is who, what is with us in the space and time, and then we're gonna thinking with words, and then I will offer some initial quick consideration to have a conversation with everyone, and then we're gonna close with appreciation. So next, please. So for the next slide, so I want everyone, please, because it is a conversational space, but I want to honor you, the audience, to be with me and with us today. So if you feel comfortable enough, please feel free to turn on your camera. But if not, you can actually put in the chat or unmute yourself to engage in the conversation. So I am gonna go first, and then I will invite everyone to join the conversation with me. And feel free to talk a little bit about yourself. Okay. So this space is not about me, a Vietnamese queer ESOL teacher, educator who live in between worlds. However, this space is co-constructed by. I invite you to share a little bit about yourself uh, in this space with me. Okay, I see that Alessandra Villamia, an ESOL teacher who is originally from Colombia. As Otis, I go to by the following pronoun: she, her, hers, ella. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Otis. Who else? Who else? This space is co-constructed by. And then I see Ruth. And then please teach me how to pronounce your last name if I mispronounce that. Okay, Ruth Saden Spinner, she, her, ESL instructor and curriculum designer. And thanks for everyone for sharing the space. Thank you, Ruth. Who else? Who else? So this space is co-constructed by myself, by Alessandra, by Otis, by Ruth. Oh, Tamara. I'm Tamara Jones from Canada, but I teach here in Maryland. I'm eating my lunch, so I keep my camera off for the moment. Enjoy your lunch, Tamara. I actually just had my coffee, so that's good. Dulas Weimer, he, him. I'm not familiar with this platform, so I don't know how to unmute. Dulas, I'm trying to figure it out too. But probably you can see on your screen on the left hand side, you can see like the mic. So probably you can hit unmute yourself. Um, Pamela, hi. Pamela Pogat. Hi, I'm a queer academic communication teacher at the university level and also volunteer in informal adult education setting. I use she, her pronoun. Thank you, Pamela. Savia Munoz, adult ESOL program administrator, he, him, his. I work remotely with an organization in Virginia but reside in Illinois. Glad to be here. Thank you, Savia. Dulas Swimmer. I was an adult ESL instructor at one time. I am currently working at the Maryland Department of Labor, and we oversee the adult education Title II funds for Maryland adult education provider. Thank you, Dulas. Jeremiah, if you go to speak or be brought to the stage, let us know, and I will bring you up. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Jeremiah. Thank you for that. Okay, and Dula said my pronoun also he, him. Alec, I am Alec with LCMC. I'm also a queer ESOL teacher and curriculum designer. I use he, they pronouns. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today in this space, in this time. I want to honor your voice. I want to honor your identity. I want to honor your pronoun. I want to honor your name as well. So thank you for sharing the space and time with me. Okay, next, please. So let us think a little bit about the title today. And please feel free to unmute yourself. Um, or you can put in the chat, and then probably I will have Jeremiah to bring you to speak if that is okay. So, thinking with words, what do we mean by inclusiveness? In other words, who, what, when, where do we include or exclude in our teaching, thinking, research? What do we mean by inclusiveness? In other words, who, what, when, where do we include or exclude in our teaching, thinking, research? And I invite everyone to share your perspective and opinion. Thank you, Ben. I first met Ethan in 2009 when I was teaching an American culture class to English student in Cantor. I'm now hosting a variety of ukulele festival across Michigan and the US. I'm happy to see him today. Dulas, thank you, Ben. Very nice to meet you again today in this platform. Dulas say, create a welcome space for all students that allows them to be their authentic selves. Thank you, Dulas. Who else? Think about this. I want us to think about this. We usually talk about the inclusiveness, right? And I'm wondering if there is any time that we include or exclude anyone in our thinking. I want us to think about what do we mean by that? Because sometimes the inclusiveness is a buzzword, right? In all of the curriculum, in all of the policy making. But do we really think about who or what or when or where do we exclude some of the people? Pamela said inclusiveness is changing the frame of references from standard to valuing a variety of English and other languages, treating communication as strategic rather than as a set of codes to learn and demonstrate knowledge of. Thank you, Pamela. Authors say, for me, all individuals are allowed to be there in the classroom, which ensure true inclusiveness. Thank you, Francesca. And at Alessandra said, we exclude by ignoring our differences. Okay, thank you everyone for saying that. So I think the idea that Pamela's talk about, it is interesting because we're always thinking about it as standard, right? And artists say like, sorry, Francesca talked about like the true inclusiveness where all individuals are welcome, right? So we have to think about the word standard. We have to think about the word true inclusiveness. We have to think about like the standard for whom, right? And to serve for which population that we are teaching or we are working with, right? Um, and the differences is always something that we we learn how to improve ourselves, right? We learn about our ignorance. We learn about the differences so that we can build a world with mutual understanding. And that is why we're all here to learn together. So I want us to think more about like what we exclude in our teaching, thinking, and research because it's gonna take to this next slide that I'm gonna ask you. Um, can you please move the next slide? Who or what was, is, and will be invisible. Reflecting on your classroom, reflecting on your space, reflecting on your writing, reflecting on your research, reflecting on your experiences. Who, what, was, is, and will be invisible. And I want you to honest with your feeling. I want you to honest with your reflection because I think like when we train ourselves to become a critical scholar, when we train ourselves to be a critical teacher and teacher educator, we have to acknowledge ourselves. We have to acknowledge, we have to reflect on our experiences. So I want us to think about that. Who, what, was, is, will be invisible in our space. Please, Dulas, go ahead. Jeremiah, can you please bring Dulas to speak? Hi,
Hello, can you
Dulas.
hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Okay,
you.
sorry. I've never used this particular app before, so this is pretty cool. I was typing and I realized it's really too long. I remember when I was an adult ESL teacher, I taught a lot of beginning level courses, so there were always self introduction lessons, right? Hi, my name is blah blah blah. And, when you have English language learners, immigrants, refugee community, you have a lot of opportunity to introduce yourself and say where you're from and talk about your family. And as I reflect on that, I think there's a lot of focus with English language learners on, kind of things like your nationality, what your linguistic background is, your culture, from like a geographic perspective. But in thinking about it in this point of view, I'm thinking I don't remember ever being in a situation where, it's an introduction of this is my wife, this is my husband, but even the imagery was always, cisgender, heterosexual couple, for example. And it's interesting when I think back to that, it wasn't an intentional exclusion, but at the same time, who knows, I might have had students in that classroom where that might have felt exclusionary. So it's just interesting that in a lot of respects, it's not an intentional thing, but it's something that maybe, I'm using a standard textbook. The textbook
Right,
makers, it was not
right,
something that was thought of. And then
right.
myself as an instructor, I didn't take that opportunity to think about it. So I think that's something where there's an invisibility that's created very unintentionally, but at the same time, it's not an excuse. It's just something that happened because I use the textbook manufacturers, I use their textbook. I didn't adapt it for my own lesson, etc. So that's interesting to think about that.
Thank you, Dulas. One point that you make is very interesting, and I welcome and invite everyone to join the conversation. So if you want to go on stage and speak, so please put it into the chat. Dulas, you mentioned something very important, something so important that we stick with the standard of thinking. We stick with the way that we are trained in teacher education program, right? In the way that we perpetuate with the weight of, the heteronormativity, right? With the way that people think like this is the only way to introduce yourself. But we forgot that, everyone has the different, something to share and the uniqueness, right? So the question is, how can we unlearn the way that we are trained to teach? right? Especially in the classroom space, how can we break the habit? How can we disrupt the ways of thinking that we are well trained by some sort of like a standard? Right? So I think that is kind of like the questions that we as critical teachers or teacher educator have to ask ourselves. How do we unlearn what we learn? So thank you for sharing. Anyone want to join the conversation with Dulas and myself? But thank you, Dulas. Ruth also say, also with pronouns, family relation, and personal identification lesson, same exclusion can unintentionally occur. Thank you, Ruth. Do you want to elaborate a little bit about that? Ruth? Okay. So, okay, so I saw someone come to the stage. Okay, cool. So thank you, everyone. So with the pronoun, family relation, personal identification lesson, some sort of like the exclusion that we intentionally or we unintentionally forget that we have to include them because that is part of their identity, right? So in addition to like asking where you come from, the name, but we also have to like dig deeper into that, the meaning of the name, right? The meaning of, you know, what your name means, right? Or sometimes we invisibilize the way that the identity of the students are, right? Like family relation, instead of asking like husband and wife, we can think about like the partner. So something like the inclusive language that we need to be aware of, right? um, Okay, so in most of the classroom that I have been teaching so far, so like do last say, I used to follow with the standard. So how can we unlearn the standard? How can we ask the question, what is missing? What is invisible in the curriculum that we haven't seen before? I think that is the questions that we have to continue to ask ourselves. Okay, Ruth say, I don't think that I can unmute. Sir Jeremiah, can you please help Ruth for that? Okay, cool, that's fine. Oh, okay, that's fine. That's totally fine, Ruth. Ruth say, I'm on a new computer that won't unmute or allow video, sorry. That's totally fine. Thank you for that. Is there anyone else wanna come into the conversation before we move on? Okay, cool. Thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now, in in the title, and we also talk about safe space, right? Now, I want you to think more about what is unsafe in our teaching, thinking, research. What is unsafe? Because if we know what is unsafe or what is safe, we are able to create a different space that allows safety for all of us, for all of the identity. So now I want you to think about that question. What is unsafe in our teaching, thinking, research? And if you want to put in the chat, I welcome and invite everyone. And if you want to come to stage to speak, please let us know. Ruth say, if we feel unseen or not represented in a lesson or situation, it can feel unsafe to speak up and participate. I totally agree with you. So the question is, how can we make the invisible visible. How can we make unseen people or object or subject to be seen? How can we make unrepresented or misrepresented in a lesson represented in our classroom, in our space, in our teaching, in our thinking, in our research? Francesca say, creating a safe space. I start with ground rules during the first day of class, which involve my suggestion and the student's suggestion. Thank you. I do the same thing. I want to speak a little bit about that. So, Francesca, before I move on, Francesca, do you want to share a little bit more about that? Do you want to come to stage to share? Is that okay for you right now to speak, or can I move on? Cannot mute. I tried. That is fine. Um, Dula say sometimes it takes a very small. Dula says sometimes it takes a very small risk to make a space safer. Our official email signature line does not include pronoun. I added it to mine even though it is not the norm. I always do that, Dulas. I always put my pronoun as they, them in my signature because I want to let them know I that is a safe space for them. That is, I am part of the LGBTQ plus community. I want them to think about, I want them to notice about the pronoun in my signature, in the way that I'm writing, in the way that I'm thinking with them. Okay, Francesca, you say unmute. Can you please share a little bit about what you share in the chat box? Okay. Um, Dula say, one of my coworkers asked why I did this, and this became an opportunity to share with them why it is so important in helping in a small way to create a safer space. Thank you for that. Ben say, I see I reflexively did not use Ethan preferred they then pronoun in my introduction comment. I'm trying to be more aware of this. Thank you, Ben, for that. We all need, we all come to learn. So I appreciate that comment, Ben. Dula say, they were very happy to learn why it is so important to the LGBTQ plus community. Pamela say, I seek opportunity to introduce my family early on in the classes, which allows me to student in the course. Um, and Francesca say, I mean, be respectful of other people's opinion and debate with respect. I love that. I love that way of thinking. You know the reason why? Because respect is the key, right? So even like because we are entitled to our perspective, we are entitled to our belief, our background, our upbringing, our lesson, our education, our cultural background, religious background, and all kind of that. But how can we move the conversation forward if we don't debate with respect? I usually say to my student, even though that we are not on the same page about a certain topic, about a certain issue, but I want us to share the idea which is respect. And we have to see other person's perspective because we want to build a community to learn. We do not want to cultivate the hatred, right? But the differences is important. The different perspectives are important for all of us in order to learn and to grow with each other. So, um, in I'm gonna come back to Francesca's point that on the very first day, I think like Francesca also saying the same thing. Start with ground rules during the first day of class would involve the suggestion from teachers, also students' suggestion. And what I also did was that I create, kind of a space where student and myself, put just one line. of the statement. What are we going to do in the class to respect the differences? And I also asked the student to put their name next to it so that every single time that we come back to the discussion, we always put the ground rules at in the PowerPoint so that the student know that we have to stick with what we made from the beginning of the class. And some of the students are very transparent. They say you have to respect the pronoun of the student as well as the instructor. So I think that would be signaling a safe space for all of us to learn. Okay. Anyone else want to say something before I move on to the next slide? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So everyone come here today, and I think we also share the same interest about querying, right? About how to create an inclusive and safe space for all of the identity, especially for the LGBTQ plus community. So let me pause right here a little bit. The reason why I put invisible, I put inclusiveness, I put safe space as the very first questions because they are part of the elements to create a queering and safe space classroom. We have to ask questions about what queering means, what queer means, for whom, by whom. So if you want to make a guess about what queering means or what queering for whom by whom means, please feel free to unmute yourself or put in the chat. I would like to hear what your perspectives are. What queering means to you? What queering means to you, and for whom, and by whom? What queering means to you, for whom, by whom? Just make a guess. Just make a guess. What queering means to you? What queering means to you? Okay, so Dula's asking the question, is it the same meaning as creating a safe space? Part of that. Jeremiah say inclusiveness with a focus on LGBTQ plus identity. Thank you. That's part of that. Pamela says suspending assumption about gender identity and presumed relationships. Part of that, a term used by individuals. Thank you for that. Give me a second, please. Sorry for that. And with the for whom, by everyone, queer identity or not? That is a good question. Meaning, Francesca said, meaning in the LGBTQIA community. Okay, thank you for everyone for the contribution. So thinking queer, So that is something that I want to offer everyone to think about. So queer or thinking queer, it is not because the research subject and or the researcher or the educator who identify as queer and or belong to the LGBTQ plus community make research queer. Instead, its implementation in conducting, thinking, writing, which is manifested in the form of relationality, unfixity, unruliness, and disruptiveness of straightness, of heteronormativity, critically name itself queer. That is that is not a definition, but it is part of the thinking in my paper when I write about the TESOL teacher candidate in after queer research. So we have to think about this. I think um, doulas also talk about would be everyone, right? Would the for whom by whom be everyone? Pamela says suspending assumption about gender identity and presumed relationship. And Ruth say, I like that word unfixity. First time I heard that. Um, Coming back to the point that doulas make at the beginning, when we talk about the introduction, right, in the classroom, we always talk about names, and then thinking about the wife, husband, cisgender. But how can we unfix the way that we think? How can we unlearn the way that we think? So queer and queerness, queer is actually a term, right? To It is an inclusive term for the LGBTQ plus, like lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning queer and plus with other synonyms that all of the other genders and sexual identity, right? So that is an inclusive term. However, we as a critical teachers and teacher educator or researcher have to think beyond the gender and sexuality perspective. We have to think about queering means that we have to think about how to how to disrupt the way that we already think about or train about, right? The fixity in our thinking, the ruliness in our thinking, the heteronormative ways of thinking. We have to do something to unfix that. Okay. So the way that we think about the straightness, that is, straightness here is not only like one way of thinking, right? But we disrupt the straightness, we disrupt the heteronormativity in order for what? In order to think about the different ways of doing, to create the messiness, to invite the messiness in our thinking. Because when the messiness happen, we see things differently. And that is why when we come back to the safe space, right? Because the safe space creates the space that all of the students express themselves. They feel they don't feel scared, right? They feel encouraged, they feel empowered to speak something that they never mentioned before in their classroom. So thinking queer does not only limit in the way of gender and sexuality, but thinking queer, that means we have to go broader. We have to think critically about what we're doing, what we are thinking. How can we disrupt the straightness and heteronormative in our thinking? Dula say for TESOL educator, one strategy would be to take the time to look at the lesson material curricula through various lenses. What does it mean to my student of color that are queer, that have different social economic background? That is right. Because you're not coming to the class with a lesson planned, right? We have to learn how to go with the flow. We have to, create a space that the student can co-learn with us, right? Because if we come to the classroom space, or any spaces with a fixed agenda, how can we open the possibility of thinking? How can we open the possibility of seeing differently? And Do not say repeating this exercise frequently will help instructors to continuously look at their classes and students through their lens. This go beyond just quitting, but it can be a positive change for so many community. Yes, yes, yes. The reason why I'm saying that because we have to go beyond that. We have to go beyond the spectrum of gender and sexuality, but we have to go beyond the binary thinking. That is queerness mean. That is queering means. Um, so I'm offering three initial queer consideration in teaching, and that is the paper that I just published this year at the beginning of this year. Uh, Thank you, Dulas. I like the comment go beyond the binary thinking. So there are three queer consideration in teaching, and this is like just the very initial one, okay? Among other ways. But I'm happy to provide what I wrote and as a starting point for all of us to start thinking about queering. So in this paper, I talked about how to provide the supporting space and safe space for all of the identity, include the LGBTQ plus community and student. Number one is acknowledging student identity. Number two, adding the discourse of differences. And number three, dropping knowledge. So I'm going to go through each item, okay? So in acknowledging student identities, we talk about pronouns sharing. We talk about respect and inclusive language. We talk about safe space. We already talked about safe space, but how can we create a safe space, right? How can we use inclusive language? How can we talk about pronoun sharing? Um, I want to hear more, your perspective about that. Um, but for me, with the pronoun sharing, that should be voluntary, okay? Because we do not want to out student. That is their confidential information. So what I always do in my classroom, especially when I teach adult English language learners, even or with the student for pre and in-service teachers, in the first day of class, before the class, I send an email to the student saying, okay, so can you please give me an introduction about yourself with the name, the preferred name, and the pronoun that you want to use in the classroom. And I ask for the consent, I ask for permission, and I also introduce myself as well. So by taking the initiative to approach the student, they know that I truly think about the identity. Okay. So I want us to think about that. I want us to start thinking about how we can make an extra step so that the student know that we are truly caring for them. We already talked about respect, inclusive language, right? So for the inclusive language, and I would love everyone, and of course, I do not know a lot about inclusive language, but I'm trying to be mindful of that. For example, I can see, okay, thank you, Ben. Ben said, Raypon, Ethan, and Julas, I have to run, but we'll listen to the rest of the discussion tomorrow via the recording. Thank you all for this enlightening and thought-provoking presentation and discussion. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for joining us. Okay, Julas said, my wife is a seamstress and costume design. With every new client, she share with them her pronoun and ask what their preferred pronouns are. At worst, some clients are confused why she asked. But at best, for some clients, it is so important to them to make them feel safe and respected, right? That is so good. That's so rare to hear, Julas. Some of the inclusive language is that, we can ask using the word partner, right? Instead of like boyfriend or girlfriend or wife and husband, right? Um, but also some inclusive language that we can think about is, um, we can ask the student about not only like the preferred pronoun, right? But the the names that they choose to use in the space. And that is extremely, let me tell you, let me share with you, it is extremely important because to some of the students who are struggling with their identities, I I have to always like keep asking, like create a space for them to share their pronouns because sometimes their pronoun changing. So as a facilitator in a workshop on campus for LGBTQs plus students of color particularly, so in every section, we always like go through with the names, right? The preferred name and the pronouns because the identity, we have to think about this. The identities, especially gender and sexuality, is fluid and changing, right? It is not like falling into a fixed way of thinking or like just a fixed point of the gender spectrum, but it's moving. So if we think about that, if we think about like how we can honor and appreciate and respect the students' thinking, that is where we create a safe space for them. And we always talk about safe space, right? We talk about, the sign with the rainbow flags, but also we have to show some sort of like the materials that we include them. We have to call out the homophobia. We have to call out the sexism. We have to call out the behavior that oppress the ways of people with their identity. So that is a safe space that I always think about to for my classroom. Um, I don't know if anyone want to share something that what you did in your space. And thank you, Dulas, for sharing. Anyone's want to share something about either one of those points that I just made. Francesca say, I agree with you. Thank you for sharing your talking experiences. As I step into the classroom to create safe space, I keep in mind that words carry meaning as well as power. Thinking that is a good point, Francesca. Thinking about like the power, and I'm going to talk more about that in the third queer consideration. But we have to be mindful of the power. We have to be mindful of the hierarchy in the classroom in order to create a safe space for everyone. Who else? I'm going to talk more about that, Francesca. I keep that in mind, okay? Anyone else? Dula say, I have a question. Have you had success in helping other instructors that you work with to create safe spaces themselves in their classes, and what has worked? So I had a conversation with, thank you for the question though. So I had talked with the faculty and staff at the institution that I am teaching, right? And I offer the pronouns. I offer the ways that we create a safe space, but I also lead with the examples. Um, I think that the student actually are the vivid example of what I have been done in the class. Um, and I would love to talk about the safe space. So you know that I am influenced by bell hooks and Paula Freire and Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh is a Vietnamese monk. So I always think about how to create an engaged pedagogy in the classroom, right? So for the safe space, I step by step because the safe space is not just coming on the first day, but it has been built over the coursework, right? So in every section that I come to the space with them, I have to make sure to check in with their emotion and feeling. I have to honor how they feel at that day. And during the conversation, I can see them. I can see them individually. um, I can create the conversation that go with the way that even we already have a themes, right? So in every week we have a theme, but I opened the space for them because part of the queering pedagogy is also about the affective, about the emotion, about the feeling. Some student told me like, Professor Trin, I feel like you also focus on emotion and feeling. And I say, that is how I'm trying to do. Because when you feel safe, you are able to speak up. Because when you feel seen, what you are able to relate to what we are talking, right? So so that is something that I always think about how to invite a student to come to the space, to talk about themselves, to talk about what they can relate to the textbook, to the materials that we are using. Um, but also, it is very interesting for me because, even like when we finish the course, right? I invite them to be a guest speaker in my class. And they say yes when I invited them because they want to share how they feel, right? And it's just so important. Like when you go to the classroom space, you don't see that you are honored, you don't appreciate it, you don't feel validated. How can you say, how can you contribute? And sometimes we have to think about like the time of the agenda, right? Because we don't want to rush the student, but we want them to feel with the process. We want them to feel with the way that we are doing and thinking. Um, Tamara say, what suggestion do you have for introducing pronouns to pre-beginner English learner? I would like to ask them to share their pronoun, but they don't have the language yet. Sevilla said, Tamara, please take a look at the beginning ESL pronoun lesson created by IMAPE. Thank you for sharing, Sevilla. That I will check that out. But I always sharing with the student about, the pronoun and give them like, that is she, he, him, his, she, her, hers, and they, them, theirs. We have to teach them at the beginning. I remember that when I taught ESL to adult English learner at a college level, right? This is the first time that they heard about that, and I say, yeah. They told me like, oh, I didn't see any instructor to do that. I say, why not? So why don't we start today? Right? And they are quicker, they are quick learner because they know they started to learn about like they them as the way to describe the non-binary people, right? To those who not falling into the gender spectrum, they're not falling into the binary gender and sexuality. So they learned that very quickly. So what I did was just like put in the board and then say, this is a pronoun and this is my pronoun. And I hope that we can use the pronoun. We can practice that in every class that we come together. So that is the good practice. Okay. Anyone else before I move on to the next slide? Any question? Okay. So the second queer consideration that I want us to talk about or to think about is adding the discourse of differences. I think Alessandra talked about differences using the word differences at the beginning. And Dulas talk about like the textbook, right? So I want us to think about the textbook. I don't know if everyone can see the picture, but just a glance, what do you see in the picture? What do you see in the picture? You can put in the chat if you want to. What do you see in the picture? A girl playing with dolls, a husband and wife. Thank you, Alessandra. Girls playing with or showing off their dolls, to last say. Thank you. What else? What else? A girl playing with dolls, a husband and wife. Girls playing with or showing off their dolls. Pamela say, wow, I don't know why they collect things. Say one character. Yeah. Hmm. Yes. What else? What else? What else? What is the what are the characters representing? Who are they representing? The daughters, so Ruth say the daughter and wife are wearing skirts, 7. The father is wearing pants. Pamela say highly gender clothing on characters. Asantha say on white. I want us to think about that. Pamela say Asantha, indeed, and the dolls appear to be on white too. Francesca said this picture does not reflect diversity of all races. I want us to think about it. I want us to think about how we can learn to unfix what is communicated in the textbook. I want us to think about how to problematize the way that the pictures are saying. Because it does not represent the diversity. It does not represent the differences. It represents for the dominant cultures, right? It represents for the whiteness, for the white ideology in the textbook that the English textbook is trying to do for years. I want us to think about that. I want us to problematize instead of like putting like the blank. We have the activity in listening skill. We have like the blank, filling the blank, or have the student to repeat the sentences and all kind of that. How can we do differently, everyone? How can we do differently in order to see this, in order to help students to see differently? So um, I want us to think about critical storytelling. So Luis Pravia Penton Herrera and myself published a book on critical storytelling, multilingual immigrant in the United States. So the reason why I introduced critical storytelling, because I want you to create your own storytelling with your students, to bring the stories, to bring diverse stories and lenses, to include own voices in the classroom. So storytelling, usually we think about storytelling like when we were born, right? We listen to the story of the mother, of the mother, grandfather. But critical storytelling is more than that. Critical storytelling have the narrator, the writer, the teacher, the student to see the injustice in the society that they are living. Critical storytelling help us to reflect, to critically reflect on the way that we see the world. We think about the misrepresentation. We think about invisibility. We think about the exclusion, right? So in this critical storytelling, I want us to think about to guide the student with some sort of thinking about how they can connect with the English language that they are learning with the social issue that they are living at. They have to think about the community. They have to think about the home language. They have to think about the motherhood. They think about like, some sort of like injustice in the school. They think about the social issue around them to make sense of their personal experience. So they'll last say sometimes we need to put in the effort to find or create other resources that do a better job of representing everyone. We can just be satisfied with the material that we are given. Thank you for that. I like to say we could reframe the relationship between the individual in that image. Yes, they were on white, the person wearing paint could be introduced as a queer woman instead. I love that idea. So the way that we think about the text, right? The text has the fixed meaning. How can we unfix that, right? So I want us to create a space for the student to think about like this critical storytelling. How can we create a space for them to talk, to critical reflect, and relate to the social issue that they are part of? We always talk about agent, right? Agent of change. How can we create a space like critical storytelling for student and teacher and researchers and writer to be an agent of change themselves? Um, the last initial queer consideration is that I would suggest to dropping the knowledge or reposition yourself. So, for example, I want to ask everyone, when a student or peer comes out to you, what would you do? When a student or peer comes out to you, what would you do? Pamela say, thank you. What else? Christine say, thank them for trusting you. What else? Pamela say, and in the context of a class, ask what they would like me to know about them. Dula say, thank them for trusting you, assure that your relationship has not changed, friend, or teacher, student, and then ask if there is anything you can do to help them feel safer or more welcome. Thank you, Dula. And thank you, Pamela, and thank you, Kristen. Tamara say, ask them if they need information about local resources. Francesca say, thank you for sharing with me. So all of the suggestions that you put in the chat, also something that I will also suggest you. So when a student or peer comes out to you, or I like to say, I would ask how they would like you to move forward with that information. Thank you for that. So those are the suggested responses. Listen deeply. Listen deeply. Listen deeply to your students' conversation. Appreciate students' courageousness and assure that the information is confidential to both of them in the conversation. And then like some of you say in the like all of you say in the chat, checking with students or peer to ask if they need any further support, if they need any local resources, if they need any mentor, or anything that you can provide the information to them. And avoid saying, I knew it, or are you sure? Because when you say those kind of, you make those kind of statement, that means you invalidate the way that they are thinking about themselves, about their identity. Okay. Alex say, oh, Dula say, Tamara asks about resources is great. Many students look to their teachers to help them navigate a new country or system they don't understand. And I'm happy to provide further resources or support it. If you need it, just email me. I would love to support you as well. Also, thinking about dropping the knowledge or reposition yourself is to think about the community-based project. So I think Francesca talked about the power somewhere above. Um, yes, Francesca. So Francesca talked about the power, right? So dropping knowledge is also something that you have to reposition yourself as a teacher. You have to trip away from the power, trip away from what you call as the teachers or the person who hold the power in the classroom. You have to reposition yourself to think with the student, right? For example, when you come to the space, you trip out of like the power, like the whatever power that you are wearing, whatever power that your identities are bearing. Think about the community-based project. Think about, something that you can work and learn from the student. So there's a lot of example in the community-based project that you can think about, right? So in one of the studies that I read, so the teacher and student create a survey to, with the students who identify not only like in LGBTQ plus community, but also for all of the identity, right? They create a survey together. They create a questions together, right? And then when they create a survey, when create a questionnaire, they create the action together. So think about Francesca said, yes, as I step into the classroom to create safe space, I keep in mind that words carry meaning as well as power. Not only the words, thank you, Francesca. The words, not only the words, right? But also think about the action. Think about what we've been learning today. How can we put into the action with the student? With the community-based project, think about a project that all of us can get involved, can learn together. We never know that the student can teach us something, right? We never know that the participant can teach us something new every day. So we talk about queering. We talk about disrupt the infixity. The infixity here is the power that we are holding. And I want you to think about that. So, initial queer consideration that three things, among other things: acknowledging student identity, adding the discourse of differences, and dropping the knowledge. So in my paper, I also talk a lot about the example. So if you want, you can take a look at that. The title is Supporting Queer Life Youth, Initial Queer Consideration. Um, and I'm happy to have a conversation with everyone. That is my email, my LinkedIn, and ResearchGate if you are interested in. And appreciation. That's it. I know that we only have an hour for the conversation, but I want to honor this space, and we can have 5 minutes left for appreciation or sharing your final thoughts about this section today, or any words that you want to share or ask me. So I'm willing to um, respond or to ask to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Ethan. We definitely have, or at least me, I have a lot of unlearning to do after this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. So Francesca say, oh no, Pamela said big appreciation to you for hosting the section. Francesca say, uh, thank you for this workshop. Tamara said thank you. Dula said thank you for so much for the conversation. Ruth said thank you so much for opening up the conversation. Hia said thank you. Alex said thank you. Xavier said thank you very much. So anyone, thank you everyone for joining me. Do you have any final thoughts or any questions for me um, before we close of the section today? Okay, so Bruce, can you please reshare your publication link? Uh, Jeremiah, can you please copy the link in the PowerPoint and put in the chat for everyone? Thank you. Yeah, most of my paper and publication in the ResearchGate, so you can find it there.
So once again, Ethan, thank you so much for this A great presentation. Thank you so much for helping us to open, I will say, like a little bit more of our eyes and offer students the opportunity to feel seen in our classrooms. And thank you everyone for joining this virtual brown bag. I would like to invite you to our next session in May. So it will be the third week in May, and it will be about teaching math. This session will be led by our Director of Community Impact, Denise Hill. So I would like to invite you to please follow our social media. So because we post the information there, so you can know the date and time for our next presentation or virtual brown bag. So once again, thank you so much, Ethan, for being with us today. And thank you everyone for taking the time to attend this presentation. Have a good day and have a nice weekend.